Okay, so welcome to this conversation this afternoon. This is a follow-on conversation from a talk that I've just done with a police officer, a senior police officer, talking about the subject of domestic abuse. And in that piece, we discussed the issue of domestic abuse in the UK, what's happening at this current time during the COVID-19 crisis. And we started to touch on what's needed to prevent it from happening in the first place. And this afternoon, I'm joined by two men who I respect deeply. We've got to know each other through our work online. I don't think you two guys have met personally, but I've met you, Chris. I've met you, Bernie. And I say it's a pleasure to have to be acquainted with you and to work alongside you. And today's conversation is really a follow-on from that chat with Sue, but steering the conversation more towards prevention, with a specific focus on the role of men in the prevention of domestic abuse and other forms of men's violence against women. So first of all, let's start with some introductions. Chris, first of all, go and tell me a bit about yourself and how you got involved in this work.
I'm Chris. I'm based in Lancashire, in the north of England. About 8 years ago, or something like that, I formed Men Against Violence, as you can see from the T-shirt. I formed it I was doing a social work masters at the time, so I formed it with two other guys from a social work course, and my dad as well, he's a really great man, a really good guy. He's not really a campaigner himself. He's quite a quiet sort of guy, but he's always had good, moral values and the different things. I was lucky to grow up in a really nice, decent family, but like growing up, particularly later in childhood, when I was at high school, I just started noticing that there were things about the world which didn't make sense to me, and I just knew were wrong. And that's, you started hearing about sexual harassment, rape and domestic abuse, and I didn't understand why someone would even want to abuse the partner, because the idea of a partnership is that you both enjoy it and that you're both happy. And like, why would somebody, even if you look from purely selfish point of view, why would you want to hurt your partner? Because that's not got any benefit to you. That's how I saw it. So I would see things that were wrong in the world, and the attitudes, particularly on some of the male classmates at school, were quite shocking. But at the same time, I was also seeing some good things in the world. I was, I had a really good male PE teacher, for example, and I remember him challenging some boys when they were being when they were excluding girls and they were being disrespectful to girls, and he challenged those, and I respected him for that. And I looked at my own dad and my uncles, and I thought, they're like really good, decent fellas. And then I was thinking about film and TV, and there were good male characters and bad male characters, in history, in real life, and in fiction. And I always thought, surely the way to end all this abuse of women and everything would be for the decent men in society from all different walks of life to come together and work with women, to challenge it and to end it. So I was having these ideas even in my early teens. And then I went to university and I learned even more things, and I got more ideas, and discovered, say, the feminist movement, and started reading about that. And then when I was doing my social work masters, I thought, right, I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to start a campaign called Men Against Violence, and try and engage with men from every single background, every different religion, ethnicity, social class. And it's been an interesting journey. I mean, there's been good things and there's been challenges. We've been very active on social media, and we've got more than 10,000 followers on Twitter. I didn't think that, a lot of our online engagements have gone a lot better than I would have expected. But we've also run events in the real world here, mainly in Preston, where we've had seminars and different things. We've had really good speakers, different topics, from sexual assault, human trafficking, child abuse. We've run an Advance Against Men and Boys conference in Blackburn, actually with a women's group that wanted to raise more awareness of that, and we had some leading people coming and speaking, including someone from is it called Duncan Craig from Survivors Manchester. So so we've done all sorts of different things, and in the latter years we did a lot of like music stuff. We're trying to find a fun way to kind of engage people with it. So we had like a White Ribbon Festival, and we've had some really good bands and local acts, and part of the journey is them being involved in it. You know, these musicians and different people, they've learnt about the issue by being involved with it. So it has been quite an interesting journey with some challenges and some disappointments, but overall I'm really pleased with how it's been.
Yeah, listen, thanks very much for that, Chris. And you know, I love the name of your organisation, Men Against Violence. It's a bit like Ron Seal. It does exactly what it says in the tin. That's what it's about. It's about men stepping up and you're performing a role to prevent violence. Bernie, do you want to talk about your background?
Yeah, no problem at all. Well, I grew up the son of a police officer, and spent a lot of my teens being very angry about being put through to the 11 plus and succeeding and going to a grammar school where all my friends went to the local comprehensive. So, and it was a boys' grammar school, so a lot of testosterone around. I grew up to be a little bit of a thug. Wasn't a very pleasant young man. Ended up getting an E and a U at A level after 7 years at a grammar school, which was not was not very common at that school. If you didn't go to a red brick or you didn't go to a commissioned officer in the forces, you were a failure. So I basically failed at every single level. And a lot of the stuff we were getting involved with, football troubles, stealing clothes and that kind of stuff, that was in the local papers against the name of the school. So, you know, everywhere I went, I wasn't popular. You can imagine living with an ex-policeman, having, you know, committed that kind of crime when his mate from the force phoned up to let him know that I'd been busy in London, you know, that kind of stuff. So I was a horrible boy. And anyway, I eventually kind of turned things around, did 17 years in the wrong job in management in various different organisations, and then had a revelation one day that as I was leaving work, as the doors opened and the cold air hit me on the face, I realised that was the best part of my day. I just moved to the South Lake District with my two daughters and my wife, and you know, they had a lovely garden, lovely house, but the best part of my day was leaving work every single day. So I decided I needed to change it. My wife helped me. She's a counsellor. She works with young people, and she basically said, what you need to do is work with young people based on what you've said. So that's when I started Innovative Enterprise, and that was in 2006. And I do loads and loads of workshops about enterprise, attitude, behaviour, business and finance, kind of working out who you're going to be in the future. A lot of my work centres on attitude because I talk about my story. Then in 2012, a complete bolt out of the blue, my sister had left her husband in 2010 and moved away with a guy in Newcastle. And my wife phoned me up in 2012 and said, the police are at the door. Your sister's been killed. And I just had no idea about what had been going on. Her partner, Ian Hope, had basically stabbed her, had murdered her in their flat after a whole series of domestic violence incidents, which we had no idea about. And my sister and I were not particularly close. We decided as adults that we didn't get on very well. So we kind of spent our lives apart. But I mean, to have that feeling that if I'd known that, could I have done something? What could I have done? So my kind of way of repaying the debt is to basically talk in schools. I do a session on domestic violence within schools. We turned it into either a keynote or a kind of 1 hour workshop where we challenge young people. Basically, I challenge boys to be better, and I educate girls to know what the signs of domestic violence and domestic abuse are. It's about relationships, obviously, but it's also about being respectful and understanding what the boundaries are, what the tipping points are, and we go through a number of different things. As you were saying, Chris, looking at things like media and TV, where we see portrayals of manliness and manhood, and being a man, and how that impacts on their relationship with other people, how they use violence as a tool of control, and also how we can challenge those things when we see them, and what situations might you find yourself in which are abusive, controlling, even though they don't feel like it. So that's kind of where I come in. I've been delivering that session in schools since about 2014. I've also delivered it in at nursing conferences as well.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I am in, and that's where my interest lies within. Obviously, looking at, thinking about, and trying to improve, reduce domestic violence and abuse.
Okay, listen, Bernie, thanks for that, and Chris, thanks for that, and particularly Bernie, thank you for sharing the story. Me, lots of issues that we're talking about now were completely invisible to me until about 12 years ago, when I started working with the Violence Reduction Unit. And I think you're right. It took things to happen to people that I care about, people that are close to me, family members, for me to realise what's going on.
Yeah.
And now that I can see these things, I can't unsee them. And I think our job, and you've talked about it, Chris and Bernie, it's about making the invisible visible for other people. That's what we do. And so thank you for sharing those initial thoughts. So just to sort of keep us going, at this current time during COVID-19, this is unprecedented times. We keep hearing every single day. But what's your understanding, Bernie, just now, of the issues during this period around men's violence against women, but in particular domestic abuse? What's your understanding just now?
Well, I follow a lot of women advocates, a lot of kind of survivors of sexual and domestic abuse and violence on Twitter. I notice you say, Chris, you've got a lot of followers. A lot of my followers are in that kind of area, violence against women area, and they have been highlighting week on week the number of incidents that are being reported. The first couple of weeks of the lockdown, there was a doubling of the average statistics, and I heard Vera Baird, the domestic violence commissioner. She was talking about how important it is that there's a joined up and coordinated strategy to make sure that victims of domestic violence have an option, that there are places they can go, that they are given dispensation to be allowed to leave the lockdown in fear of their lives. So my understanding is that there has been an increase in it. There has been an increase in murders. We don't know about the increase in domestic incidents because by nature they're domestic. And, there are going to be a lot of women, I think, who are suffering in silence or, in their own homes, not really being able to do anything about it. I suppose this is where the role of neighbours, family members, and other connected people can help, but they can only help if they know. It's a known, isn't it? And until you know that they're or suspect or are worried about something being wrong, then I think it's very difficult to find the nerve within yourself, but also find the justification for interrupting. And also then there's the worry that might make things a little bit worse. That's a bit of a garbled answer.
No,
fine, you can take from that. That's what I'm doing.
Yeah. So, Chris, from your point of view, what's your understanding, either locally in your area or nationally across the UK?
Well, before people were talking about domestic abuse within the context of COVID-19, it was instantly a concern I had. It wasn't that I'd heard someone from a women's group saying, we're concerned there's going to be an increase. It's just something I saw automatically, because it's in the abuser's mind, it's the perfect excuse to keep someone at home. You can say, you can't go out because the police won't let you, or because you might catch the virus. And obviously loads of people will be stuck at home. I know for many people experiencing domestic abuse, if they work, then work is their escape. When they're at work, they're kind of safe. It's a safe space. Or if their partner's at work, it's a safe space, whether they're at home or whether the victim is at home or not. And then all of a sudden, you have all these people, and it's basically the law of the land is to stay at home unless you have a good reason not to. And then you've got this invisible virus that people are scared about. And I just could automatically see all the opportunities for, manipulation and for more coercive control and financial control. And then I was tweeting about some concerns about that. And then I started hearing about it in China. And they said domestic abuse incidents have definitely increased because of those situations. And then I think I heard in Italy. And then now it's becoming clear that there has been an intensifying of the problem, shall we say, in this country, because now we're actually hearing about people murdered at this time, not murdered by the virus. COVID-19 is not causing domestic abuse, but it's exacerbating the conditions. It's giving the abuser more opportunities. They've in a sense weaponized the virus as a way of controlling people. And obviously, well, the good news is it sounds like the government has they have started some kind of campaign. They have put some funding, some increased funding, because of the increased thing. Whether it's good enough funding or not, it's not for me to say, because I'm not an expert in that regard. But I know there's been some response from the government, and so the thing is thinking about what can we do in this time when a lot of us are at home and we have to socially distant. How can we intervene or be useful at this time? I mean, obviously, people can donate to domestic abuse charities online, so helping them financially. I think getting information out there, I think one really important thing is to make clear is the fact that the government has said that leaving your home because you're escaping domestic abuse is a perfectly valid reason for leaving. The government has now been clear about that. In fact, there's even been some partnership with the train companies to provide free train care. But there might be some people who have been told by the parents of saying, no, that's not a valid reason. And if you leave because you're escaping from me, or the police will arrest you. So I think challenging that kind of fake news that the abuser might say is one really good thing. If we can make it clear that the government has said that you can leave, and also the police will still turn up and arrest people with domestic abuse cases, whether or not there's a virus, because some people might be told, well, the police won't come, the police have got better things to care about. There's all these lies that typical manipulators use. So I think challenging fake news is one thing. Also, with more people having more time on their hands, they've got an opportunity to learn more about domestic abuse in general, by reading, websites and online resources. So there's an opportunity for people that are perhaps too busy before to learn more to be able to do that. And there are also certain things, people can support each other and victims online. And like neighbours, they hear if they have concerns about something they're hearing happening next door, they can still ring the police, or they can still report it, their concerns anonymously. That doesn't stop because they can't physically go around there. So I think it is an important thing to look at.
Okay.
Good
the
point.
opportunities that we can help at this time.
Yeah. and there's some. I think towards the end we'll start to look at some solutions that we think. But yeah, you both highlighted that we have an issue. I think Bernie, you talked about there's been a doubling of domestic killings in the last few weeks. 13 women have been victims. An increase, I read today, 120% increase in calls to helplines. Now, I think we all agree that men are victims of domestic abuse as well. It's important we highlight that. We can't ignore that fact as well. But when we're talking about these domestic killings, we cannot ignore the fact that the majority are female victims and male perpetrators. And I think it's very important to say that, for many victims just now, lockdown started way before Boris Johnson gave his speech 3-4 weeks ago. We've all been used to living with some rules over the last few weeks, and lots of victims have been living with rules way before this lockdown period started. And when they breach these rules, that's often when the abuse can be taking place. I think we're living in a perfect storm, as you highlight, Chris, a perfect storm for abusers to get exactly what they want, whether that's male abusers or female abusers, to get exactly what they want. You're both two men speaking out against domestic abuse and other forms of men's violence. Why is it important for men to speak up on these issues? Chris, do you want to just briefly talk about why is it important for a guy like you to speak about these issues?
Well, I think one thing is the guys with the more troubling, attitudes. There's some of them that you probably couldn't do anything to get through to them. Maybe some of the more hardcore ones, unless they have a complete, the challenge by life circumstances or something like that. But if a guy with not the best attitude, shall we say, is going to listen to anyone on this issue, it's probably going to be another guy. And different guys also have different spheres of influence. So, like a vicar of a church have a different sphere of influence than, say, a man who's a editor of a large newspaper, or somebody who runs a FTSE 500 company. And and in general as well, men are more likely to be in positions of power than women. So we're in more of situations where we can, bring that influence. We're more likely to have the power to make those societal influence to change that culture. It gets more credibility with, a lot of people, which it shouldn't do, because at the end of the day, the idea is domestic abuse inequality is wrong. And shouldn't matter whether it's a man or a woman saying that. It's equally, correct. And it's really sad that there's some people that are only, they're listening to Daniel Craig when he was talking about sexual abuse, and he did really good with that. I respected him for that. But he was, at the end of the day, only saying what women have been saying for decades. And it's ridiculous that it's perhaps taken a man to say it, before some people get it. I think there's also a lot of guys out there who they actually feel quite passionate and quite strongly about this issue, but because like with me when I was a teenager, I didn't know how I can make a difference. I'm just a teenage boy, how can I stop women from being raped and abused and murdered? And it's and I think there's a lot of guys, if you just show them how they can help, they'll go, right, I'll do that. I think that's a revelation to them.
Yeah, that's an important point that you make there, Chris. And you highlighted about respect for a PE teacher that you talked about at school, and how you respected him for doing that. And that's the reality. Most men in this world would respect Bernie for challenging a male's their sexist attitude. I would respect, and that's reality. And you make another good point as well. This isn't about the three of us saying to women in this work, get out of the way, it's our time now. It's nothing to do with that. We need to be working alongside each other. And it is a shame that it takes, for some men, it takes a male voice to be that persuasive, that influencer. So I think it's important that we acknowledge the women out there who've given us the freedom and the the opportunity to speak up on these issues, because without the likes of, Libby Greenan, Mary Tagg, people that I respect greatly, who really advised me and given me space, I wouldn't be here today to speak about these issues. There's another lady who is not with us anymore, Jeanette Dehan, who just gave me great space in learning to talk about these issues. So, this week there's been a woman that we know who has been getting a lot of trolling, a lot of horrific abuse online. She's released a book about women being blamed for being victims of for abuse and violence. I'm sure all of us at some stage talking about this work have had some pushback from men and women, but why do we think this person's getting that pushback just now? And it's predominantly from men. Why, Bernie? What's your thoughts? Why is this person getting this pushback?
Well, there's a couple of thoughts about this. There's a brilliant quote, and I wish I'd written down who it's by, but it says, "From a position of privilege, equality feels like oppression." So,
yeah,
if you're never challenged, then when someone says, "Hang on, this isn't fair," then people are going to be defensive, and that often leads to violence, whether that's verbal, whether that's kind of online trolling, whether that's other kind of, pernicious behaviors. Another thing, it challenges the narrative, and the narrative that we've seen since the COVID epidemic about women being murdered by their partners, their husbands. It's been man who couldn't cope with lockdown murders wife. None of us like lockdown, but most of us don't kill our wives because of it. Yeah. So, and that's the headline, and the number of headlines, even in places which are kind of more left-leaning and slightly more aware of societal issues like the Mirror, changed their headline after loads of people complained about it. This idea that stress only affects the man, and the only way he can kind of cope with that is by meting out some violence, is massively wrong. So I think exactly what you said, Chris, the way a newspaper editor has a responsibility to challenge these things, to change the narrative on it, I think that's what we're seeing with this victim blaming book. And also when you see a woman who's standing up against society, who's saying this is not right. We saw it with Caroline Criado Perez with her Invisible Women, the fantastic doctorate level book that she's written about data and how it excludes women from loads of studies, medicine, safety, PPE, all of this kind of stuff. She got massive amounts of trolling. The same is true here. I think this doctor has created a book which basically says, look, a girl wearing a short skirt is not the reason she got raped. She got raped because a man raped her. And those old-fashioned tropes that we've always relied on to kind of blame the woman or reduce the blame on the man, she's calling them out in a massive way. So she's getting a massive amount of trolling because of it. One other way to look at online abuse, and when you've got people who are calling out the traditional narrative of victim blaming, and there are loads and loads of examples of men generally or anonymous troll accounts attacking people. One of the ways to approach that is not to kind of directly go in and attack, but actually maybe to ask the question, I wonder why you feel the need to kind of cause or discuss this in this way. Is there any need to attack the person that's writing this rather than actually reflecting on the data, on the information that we've seen, and on the kind of the drip feed approach that you've had for years, where newspaper headlines and other organizations have been drip feeding this idea that the women is to blame. Because a girl wears a skirt is not the reason she got raped. She got raped because a man raped her. Whatever the leading up to that is, if someone says no and then they are raped, then that's rape. It's clear as day, and the man is the person that has perpetrated that. So the way to discuss this, I think, online is to actually, ask people, wonder what your point is, just wondering where you're going with this. Do you deny that this is what's happening in the real world? And I wonder why your approach is so vitriolic when really all this person's doing is pointing out data-backed facts.